Question that you're asking, I would actually want to look at
If I may just add to her question.
It's an independent study, never to be construed like that very clearly. It's a study by me.
Okay.
So you should say it's a study by Mansukh, who lecturer at Stanford University. And
सर बीते 2 सालों में बहुत
population वो बहुत ज़्यादा है. So if you really look at the adult population, 90 करोड़ के करीब है. उसके लिए
prioritising the vaccination strategy seemed to be a very smart thing to do, given their role, their interactions, the potential vulnerability they had, and the role they had in transmission. So that was a kind of key part of the story. But I think the other thing we cannot forget about this story in India is the scale, as we heard in the opening remarks. I mean, the only country of comparable scale is, of course, China. And what China did in terms
स्टडी नहीं करा, बट अगर आप मेरे से जनरल ओपिनियन मांगते हैं तो उसमें ये कह सकता हूँ they are based on different set of technologies and ideas. And the biggest thing is that how do you distribute? If you really talk about an RNA vaccine, it needs cold chain, which is hugely different from what we actually have. We had great capacities to distribute. We ran the biggest adult vaccination program in the country. And that is where you were able to really take it forward. And of course, there was a huge learning from the mass immunization programs that the Government of India have actually done over a period of time.
So what are the
No, so this is not a comparative study at all. This is an institute, as I said, the institute is an independent institute for competitiveness. We are an affiliate of the Microeconomics of Competitiveness Network at the Harvard Business School. We work independently, and it should not be construed by any stretch that it is a Harvard study or whatever. It's a study which is done by an academic. So I'm also a faculty at Stanford. So you cannot say that it's a Stanford study, but you can say that it's a study which is being done by somebody who is a lecturer at Stanford or a professor at Stanford, and that's where it is. And institute does work in the area of competitiveness and so on and so forth. And we work very. कोई भी disease segment है अगर उसके अंदर कोई variation हो रहा है, of course newer vaccines will develop over a period of time. But as I understand, with the Omicron wave, there is a positive thing that has actually happened, and that is that it seems to be a natural vaccine as well. But science is still really working on it. But eventually, even if the science says that there are going to be new variants, so new vaccines will have to get developed. And I think India is very well ready for it. I think the work is already going on to understand the mutations, how really we need to tackle it. But I would really see it as a what I call pandemic, which is behind us, and we should be out of this in the next 6 to 8 months fairly clearly.
सर फिलहाल देश में 2 ही
कल बात करूंगा उसके अभी आप क्वेश्चन आंसर करेंगे और कल मेरे साथ
ऐसे ही कीजिएगा सर, मतलब सबको ही रहे जिसमें
सारे टोली
सेलेक्टिव बनाओ सर।
मैं पढ़ तो लूंगा एक बार।
कल 3 बजे
कपूर जी आप खड़े रहिए, आपने मुझे दिया है ऐसा करके आप मेरे हाथ में अभी आप लोग कपूर जी को क्वेश्चंस पूछो।
जी जी
मुझे क्या लिखा है, क्यों लिखा है, क्या स्टडी किया है, वो बताएंगे।
और कल 3 बजे आपके साथ
कल टाइम देती है आरोही कितने बजे मैं आ जाता हूँ।
think that a country as large as India could have or should have done the same, or we really don't need it?
I think for that answer, will be able to answer.
No, I was just seeking, please say, academic perspective, yeah.
नहीं एकेडमिक पर्सपेक्टिव से ही, जैसे अगर आपने बताया ना, तो बड़ा सिंपल सा क्वेश्चन है कि इंडिया ने बीट वैक्सीनेशन, बीट यूज ऑफ मास्क, इट इज आवर कम्युनिकेशन विद द कम्युनिटी टू एंश्योर दैट वी आर एबल टू टेल देम रिस्क एसोसिएटेड एंड गॉट टुवर्ड्स इट, एंड वी हैव हैड गॉट इन टर्म्स ऑफ आवर मास्क यूजेज आल्सो. You have all collectively seen it. There might be time when person might not have worn a mask, but most of the time people, when they are going outside, they have all worn the mask. Similarly, when it comes to vaccination, this is what is the story about in terms of how many doses people we have been able to administer. The main point I would like to submit is that what Institute of Competitiveness has done is that it has documented the efforts which had gone in terms of how the vaccines were produced in the country at one hand, and how the vaccine administration took place. And so probably, few of the questions which you would ask may not be relevant from the study perspective, and that's where you will see more of an individual opinion than actually an institutional opinion. But the limited submission here is that what the journey has been and what I think Mr. Mark also talked from Harvard as well as also Mr. Green from UK when we were listening besides Mr.
We at the time, and we were looking at the rate of vaccination growing. We were also celebrating how quickly Israel was going. The reality is, these are countries that don't even have a comparable complexity with India. So as much as we appreciate the efforts within the context of reference, it is on India, a country like India, that we really have the testing ground, our ability as society to address important challenges. So first of all, I would say India did not only address the national crisis, it generated a blueprint for the understanding that large-scale problems like this can be managed, regardless of your size, if the right components are in place, which is a combination of culture, determination, and I would say technology. Now, technology is, of course, a collective design. It's a design, an extension of the brain, if you want to say. It doesn't necessarily as an operating principle on its own. But what really impressed me of the effort that also are emerging from the report is the fact that, as we've been hearing more and more, COVID has been an accelerant, an echo chamber, a catalyst. What has COVID-19 been for India? In my humble opinion, it has been a trampoline towards a country that is moving into technology-driven output. And let's try to understand what it means. A country that starts blending science, culture, the normal level of solidarity with technology is a country that is able to address important challenges at a fraction of the time. We, at the time, and we were looking at the rate of vaccination growing, we were also celebrating how quickly Israel was going. The reality is, these are countries that don't even have a comparable complexity with India. So as much as we appreciate the efforts within the context of reference, it is on India, a country like India, that we really have the testing ground, our ability as society to address important challenges. So first of all, I would say India did not only address the national crisis, it generated a blueprint for the understanding that large-scale problems like this can be managed, regardless of your size, if the right components are in place, which is a combination of culture, determination, and I would say technology. Now, technology is, of course, a collective design. It's a design, an extension of the brain, if you want to say. It doesn't necessarily as an operating principle on its own. But what really impressed me of the effort that also are emerging from the report is the fact that, as we've been hearing more and more, COVID has been an accelerant, an echo chamber, a catalyst. What has COVID-19 been for India? In my humble opinion, it has been a trampoline towards a country that is moving into technology-driven output. And let's try to understand what it means. A country that starts blending science, culture, the normal level of solidarity with technology is a country that is able to address important challenges at a fraction of the time.
That is where Ministry and the Ministry of Health and DPD were working for creating the vaccine. And then there was a license that was granted, and a lot of players were there, but there were two very critical players that you do see that did emerge. One was, of course, Serum, and that was Covishield, and then Bharati, which is the vaccine. That did happen out of this. And very important that India did align itself with the world. Because if you really look at the science and how things were happening, India did align itself with the world to really create that vaccine. There was a lot of knowledge transfer. If you really look at it, this was an effort to showcase India's scientific capability. Because a lot of people will always criticize that the R&D capacity for the country or whatever, but this is where India did show to the world that this is something huge, that we can actually talk about science and we can be at the forefront of how we really develop the solutions. And Covaxin is actually a reflection of that very, very clearly. And then, of course, the COVID vaccine development timeline, it was a rapid development process. I'll leave the slides for you, but I'll quickly move through all this information. But the most important here is that how this timeline was really looked at. From 11th March 2020 to where you get approvals, which was very, very quick. And there was no reason to really say that there was something wrong with the vaccine or whatever. The results were absolutely impeccable, and we've already seen that. In fact, I would like to say one thing, that if you really look at the present wave, the success for India is actually embedded in science, because what we have really been able to achieve is the administration that has actually happened for the vaccine. This is very important here again. That was the NEGVAC structure and governance mechanism, again an integrated approach. 19 key ministries were involved here. In fact, I had a chance of interacting with many people within the ministry, within various players who were here to really document this effort. But I must say that this was a ship which had a very strong rudder, but of course which was moving things in the right direction. But it could not have happened without that rudder. But I think it has just got that integrated effort that moved. So it is scientific approach to vaccine administration. Then of course the administration was the key. A lot of things would really be said in terms of like how this approach was set. Again, deeply embedded in science as to how the beneficiaries were chosen. Whether it should be the young people or the old people or the vulnerable people or how it should happen. I think it was again something which was deeply looked at, conversion, talking to who or talking to various players within the government of India to see who are the set of people who should be really looking at this. And then, of course, the administration started with the healthcare workers, which was exceedingly important because if you really look at it, if we did not get this right, things would have actually been very different. But this is something that we really did get right. And then as we moved ahead, it moved to Ministry of Defense, to various people across the board, and then we roll out for phase 2, phase 3, and now we are continuing with that. But there's something very important, and that was about COVID. I think technology did play a very strong role in terms of like how vaccine administration needs to happen. If you really look at it, like India was possibly the first country which said that we will actually create a platform which is able to understand what is really happening. And I think this is a good case in point which should be replicated across the world, that how we can actually use technology. It had its own skirmishes, not that it did not have its own negatives or whatever, but what really did happen was that how we were able to move ahead and really quickly administer and understand what was happening. If you
to kindly felicitate the active traffic sentinel app users. First and foremost, I would like to call Mr. Mayur Kumar. Mayur Kumar, Talia Vasi.
So very clearly, if you really look at the countries in the West, there are people who have implemented vaccines for children between 12 and 18. But again, as Michael Green was also saying, it is about understanding the vulnerable population. I think the major task for all of us was to really vaccinate the vulnerable population first. Kids actually had larger or better resilience to the disease. So it makes it very mandatory for us that we should protect the population. The vulnerable population will move ahead. But I think it is going to happen very soon. 12 to 18 will open up very soon from my point of view, and I think that is the next step itself.
Have you given details?
Manufacturing तो पूरी complete है, उससे vaccine जो दोनों doses हैं vaccine की, they have manufactured enough. Take it to all the people as I really understand it. I could be wrong on that, but I think there is a whole level of scale that has happened here. And then of course it also creates challenges of distribution if you have multiple vaccines and whatever. So I think it's a good thing that we need.
And so the ability to manage that through this balanced approach around the rapid acceleration of vaccines, delivering those vaccines to the in the right prioritized way, delivering those effectively, while also managing other mitigation measures, and also communicating the need for vaccines. I think we're all being concerned around the world around the issue of vaccine hesitancy. And what we've seen in some of our research in different countries is that vaccine hesitancy isn't just about people not believing in COVID or thinking it's all about mobile telephones.
Thanks a lot. It's an opportunity. It's a pleasure for us to really come today at the Institute for Competitiveness. It's part of the embassy network at the Harvard Institute for Competitiveness. Thank you. So this was a communication strategy, how it was looked at as crisis communication, capacity building, the war room, or what you would call as the how information was being disseminated, etc. And then there were key stakeholders, and there were various sets of people who were involved here. Again, it was something very important to really understand that it's an ecosystem approach that was followed across the board. And key platforms where everybody was actually involved here in the communication bit. But very clearly, if you really look at the vaccine drive, there have been huge developments to this effort. And as Love Agarwal ji was sharing some recent data as to what is the coverage, that is a great accomplishment. But I think one of the major things that I did see that there was a whole huge push from the top in terms of really seeing how this has to be managed. I think it is very easy to criticize, but I think this is an effort where I feel that it is a positive thing that has actually happened and how we've been able to manage. So this is where I'll stop my presentation. Thanks for the opportunity, Mr.
Ahead of us. Why do I talk in terms of the future? We are clearly a more connected world than ever before. We're not converging, unfortunately. We are still diverging. But convergent divergence can be eventually become a movement of reconciliation towards common principles. What is important is to understanding that our systemic opportunities and our systemic risks are there. This interwoven nature of our society requires countries like India to take.
The team of Institute of Competitiveness, Harvard. I'm happy to receive this report from a very competent team, and I am sure that this report would have Harvard expert exact fact and figures. This report and the comments in it are very big surprise for me, but I will definitely go to this report and will give my comments and feedback to the institute. I am sure that this report will help the fellow citizen and the world to understand India's vaccine journey and the IT. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And sir, with your permission, they also wanted to distribute a copy of this report to all our colleagues from media who are present here. So we will request them to distribute it. And I would also like to thank Honorable Minister, sir, and for taking his time today for this interaction with the Institute of Competitiveness, Harvard University, sir. And we would look for other details and research. This documentation is also highlighting the journey, the learning, and these learnings will help not only India presently but also for future also. And as I've already been brought out, it also shows India's leadership in so many ways in this whole approach of a country of size and competitiveness. We would also, on your behalf, I would like to thank Institute of Competitiveness, Mr. Mansukh and the team for